Welcome to Cackling Heffas, the podcast where it's all about hot topics, wild current events, life's curveballs, and everything that makes us laugh out loud. I'm Mercedes, your solo host, bringing you my unapologetic take on the world, one cackle at a time. So get ready. It's about to be a wild and interesting ride. I tried to do that one off memory, y'all, and I think I just fucked that up, but it's okay. Let's get into this podcast. So we are a day late. Please forgive me. I have been testing out some new arrangements. As you see, we still have the old background. This is just my couch. My gallery wall is back here. Y'all have never seen the full thing, but I promise it's a full gallery wall. And this is for the people that are watching, not only listening to the podcast. But a day late because I wanted to test out like using my camera, not my laptop screen. A few things didn't work out. I'm just going to have to suss that out little by little and make little changes as we go along. But anyways, what's up? What's up? So I want to talk about my week a little bit before we get into, we have peppermint tea today. So before we get into the peppermint tea, and we have a lot to talk about, but I'm going to talk about my week a little bit. Have y'all ever been inundated with wild dreams? I've had some incredibly horrible wild dreams lately, like off the wall. One was so traumatic. I was able to wake up out of it. The next one, I had to write down notes because you know how you don't want to forget. I had to write down notes as to what was going on in this dream. So basically, my grandfather was in the dream, my mom's dad, he's been deceased for quite some time. But my impression was like that he was in a nursing home, but the nursing home was also a place where I was getting like a service. It was like a head spa, like where you get like a scalp massage and all these treatments on your hair. And I was there to get a treatment on my hair, but also my grandfather was an iguana. Like the iguana was like talking like my grandfather. And then there was like a cousin was in the dream that I don't really talk to. And then like my eye was shutting in the dream. I couldn't get the service because I had a high heart rate. And so they're like, we can't do this service on you. Your heart rate's too high. Then my eye was closing. And so I had to get a refund because I prepaid for the service. And the guy that was checking me out was Bomani Jones. If y'all don't know, he's like a sportscaster. He used to be on ESPN, but he has a podcast. And then my aunt was like laughing at me because I couldn't work my phone. Because I lucid dream sometimes. And if I have a phone and it's not working, it'll snap me out of the dream. It was not snapping me out of the dream. I was stuck there with my eye closed, freaking out that I had a high heart rate and couldn't understand why I was also in a nursing home. And my grandfather was an iguana. Like, what the hell? It was the wildest shit I have ever dreamed. I may dig into like what the hell that meant, but I can tell you there were a lot of like subconscious things. There were a lot of like things I watched before I went to bed. Like I think I watched a like video of Bomani before I went to bed. I've had this fear of like having heart palpitations. So it was like all those fears mixed up into one mumble jumbo dream. It was awful. And I normally can like realize I'm in a dream and snap myself out of it. For this one, it was me not being able to work the phone. It eventually worked and I woke up. Like, what the fuck? Oh, it was awful. But anyways, I'm still listening to Wicked nonstop. Your girl's still playing the soundtrack. It is stuck. When I don't listen to the soundtrack, it's stuck in my head. I've also been listening to GNX, and we didn't talk about Kendrick Lamar dropping his mixtape because I don't think he's calling it an album. I think he's calling it a mixtape. We don't talk about that, but it is phenomenal. Lord. Phenomenal. And it's 12 tracks. It's 44 minutes. It's short and sweet. My favorite track is Dodger Blue. Like, I love Dodger Blue. I love Squabble Up. And I love TV Off. I love the one where he sounds like Tupac. Is that one Reincarnated? And I like Luther with SZA. So I've been listening to that. Those have kind of controlled my playlist this past week. So yeah, that's a little bit of what's been going on with me. I haven't had any bad dreams since then, and I hope it stays that way, but they have freaked me out, like completely. Like when I get ready to go to sleep, I'm like, Lord, if I dream, don't let me remember it tonight because I don't want it to be nothing crazy. But let's get into the podcast today and let's get into the peppermint tea because we have some topics that we need to break down. Some of these topics are going to be a little bit educational because y'all know I'm going to give you my perspective. And then when we get into the shit, we'll talk about that because I'm going to play some clips for y'all. Y'all know I like to play a clip. So first of all, Nikki Giovanni, she passed away yesterday. So I'm filming this on Tuesday. So I'm filming this the same day I'm posting it. And she passed away yesterday, I believe. She was 81 years old. She was a professor at Virginia Tech. That's my brother's alma mater, undergrad alma mater. So shout out to Virginia Tech. She was an author and a poet and an activist and an amazing overall human being. A lot of us, you've seen, if you're on TikTok as heavy as I am, you've seen, or even before that, you've seen the clips of her interview with James Baldwin. They had a beautiful interview, and those clips always come around. Like, people still talk about that clip or that interview between her and James Baldwin. So rest in peace to Nikki Giovanni. If you follow me on Instagram on my personal page, I posted a poem of hers and a little tribute. Next, we're going to talk about Walmart. Follow me here. Walmart decided to roll back their DEI policies. And I want to talk about this because I've been wanting to talk to you all about DEI and this conversation a little bit like how I wanted. Let me rephrase that. Similar to how I talked to you about the phrase woke and how it's been weaponized, DEI has been weaponized in the same way, except it's not a term that originated in the Black community. It's a term that has been coined and crafted over the years, and it means diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Walmart decided, I pulled up an article talking about it. So let's get to that article really quick. So the article is by the AP, and it says Walmart's sweeping back rollback of its, let me start that over. Walmart's sweeping rollback of its diversity policies is the strongest indication yet of a profound shift taking hold at U.S. companies that are reevaluating the legal and political risks associated with bold programs to bolster historically underrepresented groups. And the changes were announced by the world's biggest retailer on Monday following a string of legal victories by conservative groups that have filed an onslaught of lawsuits challenging corporate and federal programs aimed at elevating minority and women-owned businesses and employees. So I don't know if Walmart I don't think they did that because they thought that they may be sued. I don't think that. Walmart's given a lot of money to Republicans. So I don't know. I think they're just highlighting that this came in light of that. But I think it was a cover for Walmart. I don't think that they did it because of that. But I want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So diversity, and I'm going to read it straight from just like what the definition of it is. And it's the presence of differences in human identity, such as race, gender, age, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and more. And that more is disabilities as well. Like people that have disabilities or people that happen to have disabilities. Equity is the fair distribution of resources, access, and opportunities so that everyone has what they need to succeed. And that's not equality, it's equity. It means everyone has the same thing and they start at the same starting point so they can get to where they need to go. What they do with it is a different story, but they all have what they need. That's equity. And then there's inclusion, and it's an intentional effort to ensure that diverse individuals are welcomed, supported, and valued and have equitable access to community and decision making. So let's talk about this for a minute, because when the right talks about DEI, they often talk about it in terms of that means that there's going to be a lot of Black people. There's going to be a lot of people of color, women, Black women in particular, but DEI encompasses more than that. So I'll give you an example. When I look at jobs, let's say I look at government jobs, right? And I go on USA.gov, which is where you apply for government jobs. And there is a little emblem that shows you that this job is disability accessible, meaning that they have accommodations for particular disabilities. And all of them have that emblem. And I think some of it depends on what type of disability it is, but they all have that emblem. And you can't discriminate and not hire someone because they have a disability, but your job can be more amenable to people with disabilities. So even though you can't discriminate, it may not be comfortable if you have a particular disability to work at a certain employer. And so an example of this would be my company has these all hands meetings, and there's now an ASL interpreter at those meetings in one of the boxes when each person is speaking. That's DEI. So as you see, it has nothing to do about race or gender, anything about that. It's being inclusive and being aware that your employees may have disabilities and you want to accommodate them and have equity to where they have the same starting point. They don't have to do anything extra in order to attend the meeting, and that you make sure your meeting platforms have transcripts so people can read them. So that is DEI. It's just taking into account that when you hire people, not everyone is the same, and you're making accommodations where needed. Or if you were to take a picture of your company, you see a vast array of people, not just one type of person. And the fact that that's being attacked, and I read to you what DEI stands for, why would anybody be against that? Why would you want a company not to follow that? I don't want to say motto, but not to have that as not to follow that statement, not to use that as a tool to recruit people. Why is that a bad thing? And so Walmart doing this is an example of what we may see other companies doing. And I hope that it doesn't become a trend, because a lot of companies, if you go to their website, they have a DEI statement. They put it out there. Whether they're following that or not is a different story. You have to walk the walk. I wanted to talk about that because Walmart, there were clips circulating because they have a Christmas commercial and it's starring Lorenz Tate and Nia Long. And they're the two stars from Love Jones, a 90s movie. And it was nostalgic. And it was, of course, a certain demographic is going to get the reference more so than another demographic. And so you're pandering to a particular group of people and you want particular dollars, or you want dollars from a particular community, but you're rolling back these initiatives. And I don't think that's right. And I'm fully for anyone deciding to shop anywhere else besides Walmart, shop at Target. I think being aware of where your dollars go in this day and age is very important, because capitalism, of course, runs our country. And so being mindful of where your dollars go is important. And I suggest to support small businesses. I do. I go to small coffee shops now. I mean, I miss the convenience of a drive-through, but I order ahead, go in, pick it up. They know me. I have my little punch card. I prefer that than going to big corporations. So I urge you to get out to your community and support these small businesses. But I wanted to talk about that because I don't want there to be an attack on DEI. I think it was such a beautiful movement and it really got legs during Black Lives Matter and during the pandemic. And I don't want that to go away because it's so important. Because the people that are saying these things, when you go look at leadership of some of these companies, Fortune 500, nonprofits, etc., and you look at their leadership, it's not diverse. You keep going down, it's not diverse. So to say that DEI is taking jobs away from white men, because that's basically what the right says, but then you look and you see that they have the jobs. I think it's important that we keep talking about that. We keep making our voices loud that this isn't a bad thing and enough is enough. Like, it's weird, it's stupid to want to be inclusive and give everybody a fair chance because not everyone is the same as you. I think it's very weird and I don't like it. And I'm going to keep talking about these things, not every episode, but I'm going to keep bringing awareness of it because after January 20th, God knows what's going to happen. So I'm going to keep talking about it. So I did want to mention that, and hopefully you learned something there if you didn't know the background behind DEI, because we oftentimes hear a phrase and we understand the premise of it, but sometimes we don't know the ins and outs. And I wanted to highlight that it's just not about color. It's just not all about that. It's way more than that. All right, next topic. So a lot of people already know that the United Healthcare murderer was caught, and it has been an interesting ride. So I want to tell you guys my perspective of when I found this out and when I saw the clips of what happened online. I didn't feel away. I was just like, ooh. And then I could feel that there were going to be undertones of Eat the Rich. I could tell that that may be where this was going to go once I read the comments. If you read the comments, you know, people were saying thoughts and deductibles. Was he out of network? Things like that. Because if you have health insurance and you've needed something, you've needed a particular type of medication, you needed to see a specialist, you know the runaround that you get. I've experienced it with my son's medication. My son, I've had to have pre-authorizations. I've had to pay over $400 for his medication at times when it wasn't covered, even though he had insurance, because the other ones, like, he had side effects from. So we've all dealt with this, and people are just venting their frustrations. Any loss of life is sad because there are family members and people that love them. So of course, I don't think that should be exalted, but I also feel like we're in like a Robin Hood situation, or Bonnie and Clyde. Remember the bank robbers from back in the day? John Dillinger, people kind of rooted them on because it was during the Great Depression and they were robbing banks and people were like, hell yeah. So I think people kind of have felt that behind this. But he has been arrested. But I will say some of the evidence that they found, like Monopoly money in a backpack, Walmart, I mean, not Walmart. Oh my gosh, I've been talking about Walmart so much, but McDonald's and a McDonald's employee reporting him. But people keep saying, like, you probably don't have good health coverage working for McDonald's, but the reward was $60,000. So I'm sure that employee could have used that money. So we're forgetting they did bump the reward money from 10,000 to 60,000, and then he was caught. So I think that played a role. But I also think there's going to be a lot more that comes out of this, and I'll be covering it. I'll be talking about it, but I just wanted to make mention of it if you haven't heard. And now, our last hot topic of this segment, before we get into the shit, is Jay-Z. Jay-Z has been named in a lawsuit that was previously filed by an attorney, Tony Busby, out. I believe he's from Houston. I think he ran for the mayor there in Houston. But the lawsuit was previously filed, and the Jane Doe alleges that Diddy sexually assaulted her. And she said that there was also another unnamed male celebrity and then an unnamed female celebrity that was watching. And that was the initial lawsuit. In the meantime of that initial lawsuit, Jay-Z was sent a demand letter with requests from Tony Busby on behalf of his client, which is the Jane Doe. And they were going back and forth. The Jane Doe wouldn't reveal herself or give much details. The demand letter was wanting him to agree to a confidential mediation, meaning there'd be some type of NDA involved. You couldn't speak about it publicly. And Jay-Z in return filed a lawsuit as a John Doe for extortion, and he filed a lawsuit against that attorney. So that lawsuit's filed. Then Tony Busby and the Jane Doe amend their original complaint, and they name the second person in that original filing, that second male celebrity, to be Jay-Z. And Jay-Z posted a statement to Rock Nation's Instagram page. And on that Instagram page, you can tell that this is a statement that he wrote. There were typos. You could clearly tell this was not a lawyer or a PR person or a manager or any type of person in his orbit that works for him. This was his words. And I've seen people say or have feelings about how strongly he came out in that statement. But if you're the person and you are alleging you had nothing to do with this, and you're being accused of assaulting a minor that's 13, I would hope that your statement is strong. The only thing that I have problems with that statement, and why someone should have maybe read it beforehand, is that it did sound good to say you absolutely should pursue criminal charges. But as everyone knows, everything criminal, I think, except for murder in most cases and in most states, has a statute of limitations. And so for this would be considered second degree assault. And I'm not saying the full word because y'all know I got to post these clips to social media, so I can't keep saying these words because that's too much editing for me. It's just me by myself, and I don't want to go back into all the editing. So forgive me if I'm paraphrasing some of these words. I'm not doing it to diminish anything. But most people know there's a statute of limitations. So I would not have included that unless you knew the statute of limitations wasn't up, because it would have held more weight. That's the only critique that I have about what he stated. But we all have to wait, see what happens. I know, of course, we all hope that it isn't true. I think with Diddy, people had their perceptions and they had examples and they had video and they've had years and years and years of talk. We haven't had that with Jay-Z. I think the most that's been talked about is, Beyonce was younger when they got together. She was an adult, but people talk about their age gap being significant. But other than that, besides rumors that he had another kid, etc., but those are all conspiracies. Those are not facts. So he's had a pretty clean slate. But this may affect his reputation. He has a big role with the NFL. And I want to talk about something else that people aren't talking about with this statement. For me at least, I've had this perception, and it's not necessarily true or accurate, but I sometimes hold it and then I'm corrected when I see things like his statement. We see people in the entertainment industry get to the level where they make billions. And oftentimes, because they're in certain spaces and certain rooms, we often equate their financial success with intellectualisms, or I do at least. I tend to think, well, to get to where you are and to be a billionaire and to be in these rooms, you have to be smart and an intellectual to a certain extent. And by no means am I saying that it had typos, but it wasn't grammatically incorrect or anything like that. But it showed his level of intellect. And I'm going to try to word this in the right way. I tend to think, they're extremely smart. And sometimes you see they're smart in their field, but they're not necessarily a Nikki Giovanni, right? And sometimes I equate wealth with that, and I shouldn't, but I just wanted to point that out because that letter kind of highlighted that for me. He's pretty regular, like your average person's in terms of what, at least that little bit of a letter that I saw. That's what I gathered from that, me personally. So I have to remember that just because someone has a lot of money doesn't mean that they have the education behind them. But there's nothing wrong with that. You get educated by the streets. You get educated by your environment as you grow older. Traveling, there's so many things that educate you. But I'm just pointing that out. It may be silly, but I'm just pointing it out because it was a rush for him to do that. You could tell he wanted to get his voice heard, and it kind of let the mask down a little bit, right? You were able to see him a little bit more, where normally we don't hear from him or see him write or see a writing from him or an interview or anything like that. So the mask kind of slipped a little bit. And so that was interesting to see. So we'll keep following that and see where it goes. They did show up to the Mufasa premiere, a movie where Blue Ivy is going to be doing the voiceover of Kiara, and Beyonce is Nala again, I believe. Yeah. And so they were on the red carpet. They looked in good spirits. So we'll just see what happens. I don't have a good impression of Tony Busby. He does not seem like a super ethical lawyer, but from what I've heard, there is a licensed lawyer in Texas, and she kind of broke down his history, and he did not sound super ethical, but I can't speak to it fully without doing a deep dive, and I have not done that deep dive. So yeah, that's the last of our hot topics. And now let's get into the shit, y'all. Let's get into the shit. So I want to talk about Andrew Schultz. If you follow me on TikTok, the TikTok for Cackling Heffas, I have talked about this. So there are two podcasters. There's two British podcasters, James and Fuhad. They have a podcast called Shits and Giggles. It was very popular, especially amongst women. I have had the problem of wanting to listen to male podcasters and then something rubbing me the wrong way and unsubscribing because it doesn't feel comfortable for me to be in that space. And Shits and Giggles was one that I enjoyed. And I felt somewhat comfortable being in that space. They didn't do anything egregious where I'm like, I'm not going to listen to this anymore. And so they were doing a press run. I believe they had a US tour and they were doing a press run on other podcasts. And they went on the Flagrant podcast, which is Andrew Schultz podcast. If you don't know of Andrew Schultz, he's a comedian. I know him from podcasts, but he was in that movie. Y'all remember there was a Kenya Burris Netflix movie with Lauren London and Jonah Hill? He was in that movie. But that was the first time I ever seen him acting, but I know he's done other acting things. So James and Fuhad are on this podcast and they're talking about the trend on TikTok. It was a trend going around that basically stated how Black women tend to elevate a guy's style when they get with them. And the trend was popular amongst biracial couples where the woman was Black and the man was another race. And it was popular. They were talking about it. And Andrew Schultz made comments of the sort, basically saying, well, surprised that Black women are known for slapping their men, or I'm surprised it's not a trend of them being violent. It was very disrespectful, incredibly disrespectful. And they laughed. They laughed and they didn't say anything back. And TikTok and a lot of Black women pack their asses up. Even, you guys know Sterling K. Brown from This Is Us. His wife was talking about how she listened to the podcast and how she was able to do that with her son. And I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast. I don't think I have, but I may have talked about it on TikTok. But anyways, she talked about how she felt so disappointed because now they don't have that thing to bond over. And she was so incredibly disappointed in them. And so I blocked him. I don't listen to him anymore. I think I was like, what the hell? But they are British. Our politics when it comes to race is a lot different here in America. So I will state that. But they know better. They know better. That they know better. So Andrew Schultz was under fire for that. So Kendrick Lamar comes out with his mixtape GNX on the initial track number 1. He talks about, he basically has a verse where it says, and don't let no white comedian talk about Black women. That's law. And so he was referring to that situation. And I think he was referring to the men, particularly the Black men that are in these rooms and spaces when white men are doing this and they don't have a response, or they giggle or they laugh and they don't push back. And that's what he was highlighting. Well, Andrew Schultz decided to get on his podcast and respond to that because he put the shoe on. And it fit, obviously. And he wanted to talk about it. Even though Kendrick Lamar didn't directly reference him, he was talking about the people around him that allow it, not him directly. But he took it as basically calling him out directly. And he wanted to talk about the hypocrisy of Kendrick Lamar saying that, while rap music often diminishes women by calling them bitches and hoes and things of that nature. And he wanted to call that out as if he's the person to call that out. Or like, of all people, you white men are not allowed to call that out. But he was calling it out. And then he took it further. And I'm going to play the clip of what he said, because if you haven't heard it, I think it's important for you to hear. Because we're going to get into the comedian and the jokes of it all and those implications on the world of comedy. And there needs to be a deeper conversation had there. So we're going to talk about it. So let me pull up what he says so you all will have it for reference.
Kill me. They will destroy me. They'll find me in the street. They'll fucking cut me up. They'll shoot me. They'll do whatever. I'm not a tough guy. Y'all do. But just Kendrick, I would make love to him, and there's nothing he could do about it. Just Kendrick Lamar, I would make love to him, and the only thing that he could do is decide if it's consensual or not. That's the only thing he could do. If it's me and Kendrick, this is about physics. It's about physics. I don't even know if I'll get hard. But if we're in a cell, there's a chance that if we're in a cell and we're bored and we done tattooing each other, whatever you do in the cell, and we ran out of board games and we did all the other things, we cleaned everything, and I'm like, man, I might as well fuck you. There's nothing he could physically do to stop that besides put his legs in the air and choose a position. Maybe.
So, yeah. So he's basically saying if if Kendrick Lamar and himself are by themselves in a jail cell of all places, which is another, anyways, if they're by themselves in a jail cell and he has no people, no security, that he would make love to him and all he could do is decide if it was consensual or not, and to have his legs up in the air. And he's repeated that phrase since that episode of having Kendrick Lamar's legs in the air, a man who identifies as a cis hetero man. If you guys don't like that term, cis is just scientific for saying you're a man and you identify as a man. It's very simple. It's basic. It's nothing crazy. But when we're talking about sexuality, you put the cis in front of it just so you can say that's a man. He identifies as a straight man. Like he identifies as a man, and then saying hetero, a straight man. And I'm only saying that because I want to make sure in the context of this situation that we talk about it, how not only is it disrespectful, people likened it to buck breaking, and it's something that happened in the slavery era where you would quote unquote break a black man that was strong-willed and refusing to do what you told him to. So they would assault black men, they would beat them in order to break their will, to get them to do what they wanted to do without causing an uproar or rebellion. Very evil shit. So people talked about how what he stated was similar. I don't know if people focused on why the only place the two of you could be alone would be a jail cell. That's interesting as well. I don't know if people looked at it from that perspective, but I'm shining a light on it now. When I say I cannot stand Andrew Schultz, I genuinely cannot stand him. There was a time where I listened to the Brilliant Idiots podcast. That is the podcast that Andrew Schultz has with Charlemagne the God. I stopped listening years ago. So the version of Andrew Schultz that is out there now, even the version of him that was out there a year ago, which was super alt-right, to the version of him where he's just being highly offensive and basically dealing in rage bait, was different then. It was very green. He was very green. But even then, the shit he said was offensive and I couldn't listen to that anymore. And Charlemagne also got on my nerves. So I was like, nope, not listening to this anymore. So I unsubscribed, as most people should do. You don't like the content, unsubscribe. So I unsubscribed, but I heard about this situation, the initial James and Fuhad, and then of course, people talking about GNX and him mentioning that incident, or Kendrick Lamar highlighting that incident. And then, of course, because I'm online, I see the clips of his response. And since then, people wanted Charlemagne to kind of check him. I don't know why people thought Charlemagne would check him. If you were like me and listened to Brilliant Idiots at one point, Charlemagne wasn't going to check him. So he and Charlemagne sit down about it, and he's basically saying, the people on the podcast are telling him like he wasn't talking about you per se, but the people around you. And he's like, well, he better not. And people were saying, I think someone else on the show, maybe a producer or something, was like, he's not going to even give a response. He's not going to give you a response. And he was like, he better not. And the girl was like, stop saying that. Cause I'm like, yeah, who the fuck are you to say he better not? Like, what the fuck? So that rubbed me the wrong way. Just like you're sitting here talking the shit, he can talk the shit and respond if he fucking wants to. He said it the first time, he'll say it again, he'll say something else if he wants to, just like you keep running your fucking mouth. So he talks to Charlemagne and he says that people have been sending death threats and saying that they'll take out his family under photos of him and his kid. And I'm like, you put that energy out there, like, they're trolls. Just like you're just a comedian saying shit like you just said. They're trolls. They're just trolling. What's the big deal? That's the energy we need to give back to these people when they double down. And I want to talk about the disgusting, the fact that was absolutely horrendous, and the fact that Charlemagne said he can't believe we're policing comedians now, and that he doesn't pick a side. Let me ask a question. So if you're a comedian and that is your title, you can say whatever the fuck you want if it's under the guise of a joke. Like, that doesn't make sense to me, because if you have a podcast format and you have hosts and you're talking and you go from being serious to maybe being jokey to maybe being lighthearted, in that context, because one of the hosts is a comedian, anything goes? Is that what we're really saying? So we're saying we can't say that there are lines with things. And he basically said that if you protect one group, then what does that make comedy if you're protecting or you're singling out like only Black women? And someone made a point like, you are the protected group. You are the white man on stage talking about every other race. You are the protected group. So I just wanted to know, when do we get to a point where has this always been a thing? Like, comedians are just untouchable. They just can say whatever they want under the guise of a joke. I don't believe that is true. And I think I've heard a comedian say, and don't quote me, I believe it was Cat Williams that said, there's a way to tell a joke that is not offensive, but maybe mocks, or it's funny, or it brings light to a real life situation. And the person that you're talking about doesn't feel discriminated against. They don't feel ostracized. But in order to do that, you have to be creative. You have to be smart. And it takes time to craft that. It takes time to be that creative, right? You have to work it out. You have to suss it out. I think comics have to work out jokes. They have to talk to people. And that art may be lost because what he's doing is lazy. It's rage baity. It's stupid. It's old school stereotypes. It's saying Black women are violent or will slap you. And it's like, those are such lazy stereotypes. Basic. It's just stupid. Like, it's not funny. So not only you're not being funny, you're using old, antiquated stereotypes. I don't know. Maybe that's his audience and that's what they want to hear, but I don't get that. And I just want to know. I want to hear, what are y'all thoughts? I'll have a poll on it up. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about that and highlight the disgustingness of Andrew Schultz. I don't think anybody should be listening to his podcast. I don't know why he has a Black man and a person of color. He has an Indian host and another white guy. I just don't think that shit is funny. Like, I don't, at the expense of one particular type of group over and over and over again. I just want you guys go listen to an episode of Brilliant Idiots or Flagrant and you tell me how it feels. Like, it is not a fun experience to listen to. It's not funny. Like, just go and see for yourself and then you'll understand what I'm talking about if you don't already know. So that was the shit, and let's get into the next topic. Y'all, I don't really have anything that's made me cackle hilariously this week. Nothing's really, I mean, have y'all watched, there's a TikTok trend where there's like the Muppet, like the shrimp or something like that. And people are telling like horrific medical stories or accidents or embarrassing shit. That has had me cackling. I don't know what the trend is called, but the sound to it is like a prayer, the Madonna song done by the choir. So if you search that, you'll see it. Now you got to read. It's like the ones where it's just a picture with text and you got to swipe to get the story, but they're funny as hell. That has had me cackling. But lastly, our last segment today, this is a new segment where we're going to talk about my random thoughts, and we're going to go back to TikTok. These people you probably have heard of or know. One person I know you definitely know. And I want to talk about this because I want to talk about biases, and it'll be our last topic. So let's get into it. So last night I was up scrolling, trying to go to sleep like I always do. And Jackie Aina, who is a makeup artist, she is an influencer, an OG makeup YouTuber. If you don't know, men and women have heard of her. She's pretty popular. Made a video, like I caught it right after it uploaded. And she was talking about this group that's being dubbed on TikTok as the Fab Five. One of their names is Machiavelli. The other's name is Jamila. They are part of the Fab Five, but these two women she was talking about in particular, because other people have been talking about them lately and basically saying, they call it yapping talk, where people just yap about the stuff that's going on TikTok, and other people, they just turn their camera on and yap about it. And so there's been discourse about that. So she decided to touch on the topic because she had interactions with both of those ladies, Jamila and Machiavelli, or Mecca. She goes by Machiavelli on TikTok, but her name's Mecca. So she talks about how there was discourse about people being upset that Jackie Aina didn't want them to call her auntie. And then there was discourse about that on TikTok for months. Like, we were calling you auntie before. And she basically said I was vulnerable, saying that I was parentalized at a young age where My parents kind of put me in charge in a way that kind of took away my youth. And at first it was okay, but now it's kind of re-traumatizing me. So I don't want to be called auntie. Instead of people just respecting that the woman didn't want to be called auntie, they kind of dragged her. So people had discourse about that, talked about her age and other things. And that happened. And then she decided to change her name because she's engaged. So she changed her last name or added the name of her fiance in her bio on her Instagram and her TikTok. And people were saying congratulations. So one person made a video and was like, I told Jackie Aina congratulations and she blocked me. And then this became a trend of other people saying this happened to me too. So the two women, Mecca and Jamila from this 5-5, posted videos saying, well, y'all know, one posted a video saying Jackie's strict. She blocks people. She is well known for having her boundaries. And then the other girl, Mecca, was like, she blocked me. Well, Mecca had said some things about her in the past and I had seen them. So I definitely know she probably had Mecca blocked. Jamila was like, I was defending her. And her next video was like, now I'm blocked. And I was defending you. I blame Mecca because they're best. They're good friends. They've been friends outside of TikTok, but they collaborate a lot on TikTok. And Jackie Aina was basically saying, I blocked her before this event. And so when she came on and said, I'm blocked too, to her, it felt like a pile-on. And at the time, she didn't say about it, but she had blocked her 3 months prior because she had said something else about her age and the auntie thing. And she didn't like it. So she blocked her, even though she had previously interacted with her content and liked it before. But once she saw her talking about her, she was like, I'm going to block her. So she felt piled on and she felt like that clique was bullying her. And she talked about it being bullying. And also, Jackie Aina is a dark skinned woman. These two women are fair. They're light skinned. And she talked about colorism and maybe them saying that they were blocked. They would see it. Their communities and their followers would see it as a light skinned woman saying, a black woman blocked them and how that may be perceived as colorist. I don't know if I can connect that to, I get exactly where she's coming from and I can see it. That's not the first thing that my mind went to, but that's something that she's experienced and I get it. I get it. Like, I didn't see that at first. And when she brought it up, I was like, okay, I can see how you got there. But the discourse since she posted that video has been the two women have posted a response. They have a fresh podcast. And so they're like, we're going to talk about it on our podcast. So they used her video as PR to talk about it on their podcast, which I don't blame them. I'm going to listen to it later because I don't know if they do any self-reflecting, but I do think Jackie Aina had a point to say, you all talk, your brand is kind of like yapping. They do other things, but your main brand is yapping and talking about things. And it's more so about people and topics that come up. But it's more so like about people. It is somewhat niche because it's very specific to talking about people and the things that are going on TikTok and what other people are talking about. And basically, she was now yapping and telling her side of something. And people were basically like, well, you have 3 million followers. They don't have as many followers as you. Aren't you doing the same thing as them? Like, they were talking about you and now you're doing the same thing. And I'm like, well, it happened to her. She felt some type of way. She is allowed to share her perspective now that the topic of them has come back around. Fuck if she said anything about it before. She decided to keep quiet when they were talking about them being blocked by her. And now she decided to talk about it now that people are talking about them. I don't blame her for that. But I wanted to talk about when I first started the video and I first started to hear her perspective, I felt some type of way. And I had to check that. So the reason I'm bringing this up is, do you ever check your biases in real time? Do you see yourself having a bias, don't quite know what it is, and check yourself? Because as I was listening to her, I was like, could this be a bit exaggerated possibly? And I was like, wait, check yourself because this is her experience and she's telling us her experiences and we have no right to tell her how she should have felt about the public discourse going on about her and her name, her engagement, and whether she puts that information out there or not, and whether she wants to be called auntie, and people are dogpiling. She has every right to talk about that. Like, I had to take my bias out of it and actually listen to what she was saying. And I wanted to talk about that. Do you do that in your everyday life? Do you walk around with empathy? Do you pay attention to the words that come out of your mouth? Pay attention to how you're thinking about something and check and see if it's a potential bias and if it's valid. Sometimes it's valid, but do you check yourself and be like, this isn't valid, and put yourself in someone else's shoes and show empathy? Do you do that? As I've gotten older, I do that. As I've got my master's degree in public health, some of the things I learned, some of the things I read, some of the papers I've read totally gave me more empathy. Like, I got to see the world in a completely different way than I had before. Even with my undergrad, like the things that I learned helped me so much. And I operate with empathy in my daily life. I have boundaries as well. And me and one of my sisters aren't talking right now because she said she was implementing a boundary and I didn't see it as that way. I saw it as something that was like, I don't want to do it and I don't want to do it even though it's going to be a benefit and help you out, because I'm going to call this a boundary because I just don't do it. And I'm not going to get into it here. Maybe I will and get you guys' opinion. But then I had a boundary of my own and I'm like, I operate out of like, well, I would do this for you. And not everyone will operates that way. I get it. But also, just as she has a right to implement her boundary, and I got that, I have a right to implement mine and what I want to surround me and the people that I want, the type of empathy I want people to have for me. And it's hard to understand what I'm saying because y'all may not agree with me with the way I'm telling this, because without getting into the details, because it may be like, no, girl. But I just want to say, I walk through my life and I try to have empathy in every situation. When I'm talking to someone that's different than me, that has had a different life, I pay attention to how I react to what they say, the words that come out of my mouth, and their experience is going to be different than mine. And I wonder if we all take that and walk by that and live by that everyone has a different experience. And to be mindful of that, we would be better off for it. We would be better off for it. And that's all I got, y'all. This was a longer episode. This is an hour episode. I can't believe I talked that much. I am trying to get better in how I structure the show. So any feedback that you all have is welcome. Please follow, subscribe to like the podcast and like today's show if you enjoyed it. Yeah, remember to always be a vibe. I can't remember my whole spiel and I'm not pulling it up. I'm going to have those things memorized because when I listen to podcasts, there's certain hooks and lines of the introductions and the closing that kind of stick with me that I always remember. So I want y'all to have that. So I'm going to get better with that. But yeah, always be a vibe. And I will see you all next Monday. And last thing, if there's ever an instance where you don't see a podcast by Monday evening, something happened and I'm always going to get it out the next day. That's the latest I'm ever going to be. And if it's going to be later than that, I'll tell you ahead of time. All right. Bye.